All right, let's keep it going with some more schedule previews. Like I said, I hope to do a ton of these. I want to get through as much of the Power Five as I can, and even some Group of Five. I feel bad that the Group of Five is on the floor, but it is what it is. What are you gonna do? There's nothing you can do. Anyway, we're just getting started with these schedule previews. I've done one or two so far. Like I said, we're going to keep them going. I don't expect everybody to watch every single one. But if you're curious about what I think about certain teams, then watching the schedule preview of that team is a pretty good way to find out. These are not prediction videos. How many times we're going to have to keep telling you the prediction videos come later? This is a schedule preview. Here we go. On to the next team. All right, Tater Man, you're up today with a 2023 schedule preview. Doing a whole series of these videos. I've done several already. You can click back and check. I think Tennessee and Alabama, Clemson today. Texas and LSU, I think, will be the next two that I do. I'm not sure on the order, but I think Texas and LSU will be the next couple of ones that I do for those of you that are asking. I'm getting these from Patreon. I made a post over there, what schedule previews you want to see. Everybody's leaving their comments, and I'm just kind of going in order. So, like I said, up today, the Clemson Tigers. Clemson went 10-2 last year. One loss on the road, one at home, both in the non-con. Clemson, of course, did go on to win the ACC championship last year. They lost on the road at Notre Dame, and they lost at home to South Carolina. Two teams they play again this year. So you know what I like to do, kind of compare last year's schedule to this year's. Is it harder? Is it easier? Compare the non-con opponents. The ACC plays four conference games, or four non-conference games, 8 conference games, 4 non-conference games for a 12-game regular season schedule. Then I like to take a look at the conference schedule. Are the tougher games this year at home or on the road compared to last year? And kind of just a brief overview of the schedule. Are there any trap games? Difficult road games, back-to-back tough games, things like that. Most of you have been around long enough, you kind of know how this works by now. Let's start out with the non-con. The non-con is pretty comparable to last year in terms of opponents. I mean, I already told you that, Notre Dame is technically not in the ACC. Notre Dame plays 4 or 5 ACC opponents a year, but it's a non-con game every single time. So Clemson played Notre Dame last year at Notre Dame. They get them this year at home. That's the benefit. It's obviously better to play at home than it is on the road. But in terms of the opponents, they play 2 Group of 5 teams, Charleston Southern and Florida Atlantic. Same thing last year. And 2 Power 5 teams, same as last year, Notre Dame and South Carolina. The Group of 5 teams were different last year, but two Power 5 non-con opponents, 2 Group of 5 non-con opponents, I guess is the best way to put it. Or non-Power 5. Charleston Southern, I believe, is FCS, but I think you understand what I'm saying. So, as far as the non-con goes, Charleston Southern at home, Florida Atlantic at home, should be 2 pretty easy wins there. You scroll on down, schedule a little ways, you get Notre Dame at home late in the year, November 4th, and then, of course, the annual rivalry game to end the year against South Carolina, this year on the road in Columbia. Clemson lost to South Carolina last year in the last game of the regular season, snapping, I believe, the longest home winning streak in all of college football. Clemson had not lost a home game, I believe, since 2015. It was a long, long time. South Carolina got the win. Of course, South Carolina finished off the year, the regular season anyway, with 2 wins over top 10 teams. They had beat Tennessee the week before at home. Then they go on the road and beat Clemson in the first time in forever. So, non-con schedule in terms of opponents is very comparable to last year. If I had my choice, I think I'd rather play Notre Dame at home and South Carolina on the road than the other way around. So maybe overall a little bit easier of a non-con schedule given the fact that the Notre Dame game is at home this year. Let's go through the schedule, take a look at it, start things off. Conference game Monday. That's going to be the Labor Day game this year on Monday night at Duke. Duke was surprisingly good last year, and no one really talks about it. And I guess I get why. They were, I believe, an 8-win team. But I don't really think they were all that good. The ACC, I just think, was down last year overall. I don't want to take anything away from Duke. They had a first-year head coach, and it was a great year. And even though it's a home game for Duke, this should be a game that Clemson wins easily. Now, I know they're breaking in a new offensive coordinator, but he's only new to Clemson. He's not new to being an offensive coordinator. He's had one of the best and and most innovative offenses in college football at a couple of different places over the last few years. Most recently, of course, last season at TCU, where he took Max Duggan and the Horned Frogs all the way to the national title game before they got pushed in by Georgia. But so they bring him over to run the offense. Cade Klubnik is back. He'll be the quarterback this year. The ukulele is transferred to the West Coast, Oregon State, I believe. Still have Will Shipley at running back. Will Shipley's good. Maybe the best player on Clemson's team, at least on offense. He's no Travis Etienne. I mean, he's not on that level, but he's really, really good. And like I said, probably their best offensive player, depending on how Cade Klubnik performs this year. Clemson needs help at wide receiver, and they're replacing a ton on defense, particularly up front. And their secondary got exposed in a couple of different games last year. Wake Forest threw for, I believe, 6 touchdown passes on them. South Carolina had some success against them. Notre Dame, of course, beat them. But Clemson's going to have a talented team again. They should be able to handle Duke there in week 1, you would think. They'll be a significant favorite. Then there's those 2 non-con games against a group of 5s that we talked about, or Charleston Southern, I guess, is FCS. And then FAU, Florida Atlantic, a group of 5. And then, I don't know, Clemson fans, you tell me, is this the biggest game of the year for Clemson? I do think this is the biggest game of the year for Florida State. I think this is a bigger game this year for Florida State than the Miami game is. Normally, Florida State and Miami is normally the biggest game of the year for each of those 2 teams, right? Just a bitter, intense rivalry. Florida State absolutely they beat Miami like they owed them money last year and lost to Clemson, Florida State did. It feels like this is the biggest game of the year for Florida State. I'm not sure if Clemson fans feel that way. I mean, of course, you've got the rivalry game, the South Carolina game at the end of the year, which is huge. You've got the Notre Dame game. You play North Carolina, NC State. I don't know. You can let me know down below, Clemson, man. Do you think this is the biggest game of the year for you? I do think Florida State's going to be a good team. I think they are a legitimate top 10 team heading into the preseason, or heading into the season, in the preseason. Whether or not they finish in the top 10, we'll see. Had their best year in a while last year, and a lot of pieces coming back, and they cleaned up in the transfer portal. Florida State, I think, is going to be a dangerous team, but they have to travel and play at Clemson. This is going to be a hell of a game in the first month of the season, September 23rd. One of the highlights of the first month of the season, Clemson at Florida State. Then you go on the road and play Syracuse. Team you should be able to handle even on the road. Back home against Wake Forest for your homecoming game, and, of course, that quarterback that lit you up last year, Sam Hartman, he has transferred on. He's now at Notre Dame. So you don't have to play Sam Hartman on October 7th when you play Wake Forest, but you do have to play him later in the year when you play Notre Dame. So you just can't get away from Sam Hartman, it seems like. Then you have your bye week, October 14th after that Wake game, and then on the road to Miami. Miami's a tough team to figure out. They're a little bit like Texas A&M. I mean, they're not as talented as Texas A&M. Texas A&M's been recruiting at a higher level than Miami consistently over the last few years. So as far as the talent or total talent on the roster, Texas A&M is more talented than Miami. But these are 2 teams, Miami and Texas A&M last year are 2 teams that, have way too much talent to perform and finish with the record that they did. Miami's going into year 2 now under Mario Cristobal. They're changing offensive coordinators. They've got a little bit of a QB circus going on down there. Garcia's transferred out. We'll see what happens with that. They had a good recruiting class this season, but how many true freshmen can you really rely on in a year? I do think you're going to see some freshman offensive linemen get to start for Miami this year, which is probably their weakest position group. Last year, offensive line, they signed some absolute beasts along the offensive line this year. No one doubts Mario Cristobal's recruiting ability. We've talked about it ad infinitum. It's results on the field that Cristobal's got to get a hold of. But anyway, that's an interesting game, too, on the road at Miami. A road game for both teams, really, because Miami doesn't have a stadium. They have to travel 30 miles where they rent out the Miami Dolphins Stadium and play their games, but that's neither here nor there. Back-to-back road games, though, because after that you got to go to NC State. Coach Dave, how you doing? Head coach of the Wolfpack. Disappointing last year, at least compared to the hype we heard in the preseason. Devin Leary, another ACC quarterback that has decided to transfer out. What's going on with that? Garcia from Miami transferred out. Devin Leary from NC State transferred out. We just talked about Sam Hartman from Wake Forest, transferred out. Clemson, the ukulele, transferred out. A lot of quarterbacks leaving the ACC. On the road at NC State, Clemson should be a favorite, depending on what has happened, I guess, in the Florida State-Miami game. I would assume, at least right now, you would assume Clemson would be favored in that game. And then the big home game against Notre Dame, revenge game from last year. Marcus Freeman heading into year 2. Notre Dame, another team that had a pretty good recruiting class this past cycle, but again, hard to rely a lot on true freshmen at more than a couple of positions. They do get a significant upgrade, though, by getting Sam Hartman. I mean, quarterback's been one of the positions that's been holding Notre Dame back for a while, so I do think they'll be better off, at least quarterback-wise, this year. We'll see. It should be a good game. Home against Georgia Tech, first-year head coach there, Brent Key, who was promoted from within after 4 or 5 other coaches turned the job down because Georgia Tech couldn't come up with any money to pay him. Apparently, Brent Key's willing to work for free, so they hired him. Clemson should win that one. And then a couple of tough games to close the season out. I mean, we can laugh at North Carolina. They did disappoint last year. But they get Drake May back, and we talked about Clemson and how they struggled a couple of times last year against the pass, getting lit up, and that was with an elite defensive front and pass rush. If for whatever reason, by this point in the season, Clemson hasn't developed along the defensive line and found some answers in terms of pass rush and things like that, and the secondary hasn't improved from last year, I guess it's possible Drake May has a field day in this game, but it's hard to predict that now. But North Carolina, I mean, Drake May is amazing, but North Carolina's got some obvious deficiencies in other places. But a tough 2-game stretch here, home against North Carolina, and then on the road against South Carolina, the in-state rival, who was your second loss last year, so your second of 2 revenge games this year, ended things off against the Gamecocks. Not an easy schedule for Clemson. I mean, I know people like to clown on the ACC with the whole who they played deal, which, of course, they say that about everybody, or they call it the all-cupcake conference, or, of course, Clemson is good. They don't play nobody, woo. This is not a schedule that I would describe as easy. Now, of course, does the ACC conference schedule hold up against maybe an SEC schedule or a Big Ten schedule? No, maybe not. But, those are the 2 best conferences. It doesn't mean that, every team you play in the ACC is a 0 on a scale of 0 to 10. I mean, and even in terms of just ACC schedules, you draw Florida State, one of the better teams in the ACC. You get Miami, a talented team. I know they underperformed last year, but it's a talented team. And a coach who's proven, he can win some games. On the road at NC State, Notre Dame, North Carolina, South Carolina. I mean, I wouldn't classify this schedule as quote-unquote easy. Now, Clemson will be more talented than every single team they play. And my guess is, at least right now, Clemson is a favorite over all of these teams. Now, once we get a month into the season and we get a look at some of these teams, maybe some of those lines change. Maybe for whatever reason, South Carolina starts off red hot and Clemson drops a game early, and it looks like maybe South Carolina would be a favorite over Clemson. But like right now, if you were to put a line on these games, Clemson's probably at least a small favorite in every one of these games. I mean, a significant favorite in some, but at least a small favorite in all of them, including at Miami, at South Carolina, home against North Carolina and Notre Dame. They're probably a favorite home against Florida State. They're probably at least a small favorite in all those games. So we'll see. A lot of people think the run is over for Dabo in terms of national titles. I'm not convinced of that. I've got some concerns about Clemson and Dabo, the same as everybody else. Kind of his attitude towards kind of the direction that college football is going, and sort of unwillingness, at least so far, to delve into the transfer portal to try to fix issues or holes in the roster and things like that. But I don't know. We'll see. You got to keep in mind we're expanding the playoffs to 12. So even if you're one of these people who runs around going, "Oh, Clemson has done fell off," yeah, they fell off to 10-2, 11-1, and barely missing the playoffs. I guess that's falling off compared to where they were at. But this is the last year of the 14 playoff. Well, let me ask you this, without knowing anything, without knowing who's leaving Clemson after this year, who's coming, nothing, without knowing who they're playing next year, all that. You think Clemson will be in the 12-team playoff in 2024? First year we have a 12-team playoff. Would you bet against it? Of course you wouldn't. So you might think Clemson's not making the playoffs this year. Maybe you think they're going 8-4 or 9-3. I don't know what you think. But would you bet against Clemson making a 12-team playoff next year when they go to 12? I wouldn't. So anyway, there you go. That's Clemson's schedule. Let me know what y'all think down below. Keep in mind, I'm doing a whole series of these. Please hit the thumbs up on this. Share these out, too. Share these out. It's hard for a college football pimp in the offseason here in the YouTube streets. Share these videos out. Make sure you're giving it a thumbs up. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know what teams you want to see. I'll talk to you again later. Have a good morning.